Hello, welcome to the ALCTS webinar, Mythbusting, the Search for a Tech Services Generalist, Session 5 of the 5-session series, Re-envisioning Technical Services, Identifying Leadership and Talent Management Best Practices. I'm Holly Tomrin, a member of the ALCTS Continuing Education Committee. I will be your host for today's webinar. Our presenter today is Jenica Rogers. Jenica is Director of Libraries and College Archives and Dorff Endowed Director of Applied Learning at the State University of New York at Potsdam. Previously, she held positions in cataloging, collection development, and staff training. Jenica earned her MLIS from the University of Wisconsin-Madison. Her current professional interests include looking at how the information economy is breaking down and reforming following the advent of the Internet, and informing, mentoring, and supporting new library professionals. There are a few things to keep in mind for today's presentation. All attendees are muted. To help ensure the best sound quality possible, please close any inessential programs. If you have questions for Jenica, please type them into the question box on your screen, and she will answer them at the end of her presentation. Our software does not have interactive chat capabilities. You may use the ALCTS hashtag if you wish to use Twitter to comment on today's presentation. The hashtag is ALCTSCE. We do not monitor the Twitter feed, so please use the question box to submit questions and comments. We will answer questions at the end of the presentation. This webinar is being recorded, and you will receive an email with links to the recording and presentation slides. And now, here's Jenica. There will be a slight delay as we change presenters.
Hello. So this is Jenica. It's a pleasure to be here with you today, and I am going to talk about our search for a in that process. Right in my office. On the background, you're going to be seeing through this presentation, I kind of have a thing for NASA, so you can bear with me on that. And I just wanted to tell you a little bit about myself, because I think that when you're listening to a disembodied voice in one of these, it is I'm sorry, it seems that there's some problem with my sound. So I'm going to keep talking and look at the messages that I'm getting about my sound. I am unsure what to do, so I'm just going to keep going, and we'll hope that we can figure it out on the back end. So I apologize for the brief disruption there. So let me tell you a little bit about myself. When someone's talking to you, you want to know why you're listening to them. So I'm 41, and I have been working in academic libraries since I was 18 years old. That is legitimately more than half my life. Almost to the point where I have I've been in libraries for longer than I know how to describe to people. It's just a part of my identity. So my first job out of my grad program was as a technical services librarian. I was one of 3 professionals on staff at a very small college in Northern Illinois. And that meant that I had to learn really fast how to do everything. I was responsible for everything from selecting materials over on to the point where we then needed to weed them from the collection. The whole life cycle of our library collections were my responsibility. Then, because grad school is expensive, I got my first part-time job, and that was working as a training consultant for a multi-type library consortium in Northern Illinois before all of those consolidated. And I trained my colleagues from public and private institutions how to use the tech services modules of our ILS, which was an amazing way to learn about the functionality of the system, frankly. After that, I moved into a collection development and cataloging position, and I was started in what it was essentially an entry-level position, but quickly moved up into a leadership position as the team leader for all of our tech services unit with a staff of 10 professionals, a slightly bigger place. And now I am the Director of Libraries and Archives here at SUNY Potsdam with a staff of 25, plus a dozen more people who work with me in the Center for Applied Learning, which includes faculty-student research, so there are some very interesting synergies there. What I plan to talk about today. I'm going to use my own experiences as a case study, and it's a failed case study. We don't talk about that nearly so much as we talk about our successes, but I want to talk about what I learned from those failures and what I think we can all take away from that kind of failure to help us to better manage our expectations, manage our job ads, and manage some profession-wide issues. I'll also share some concerns and perspectives from the field. I reached out to SUNY librarians to try to understand their perspectives rather than just my own. I wanted to be able to share more than just the SUNY Potsdam perspective on this. So I surveyed the hundreds of librarians I work with across the state. And then I'll talk a bit about what we can do with those perspectives and insights. Before I begin, though, I'm using the phrase tech service generalist, and I felt like I needed to define that a bit. I think of the tech service generalist as being the technical services librarian title, or a cataloging and serials librarian title, or collection development and acquisitions title. Those are the titles that represent sort of overlapping Venn diagram jobs, the ones where it's not simply, for example, in the list on the right, specialists, the electronic resources librarian, the cataloging librarian for a music library, or digitization, scholarly communication. Those are far narrower sets of responsibilities that don't have the same kind of overlap that someone who is doing cataloging and serials has. So I'm talking about the generalists, the people who have to be, in some ways, a jack of all trades for technical services. And the reason that my focus sits there is that I believe that starting as a generalist was the best thing I ever did. I had to learn on my feet, and I had to learn in big, complex, conceptual ways in order to do that very first job that I had. And I have been grateful ever since that that was where I began. So I'm going to talk about us. This is my library. Immediately, my first floor, only a portion of the first floor, but it's a portion of the first floor immediately after a facelift renovation in 2015. Obviously, we weren't open because there are no people in this photo, but messing up the symmetry of everything. But right now, for example, during finals week, that space is crammed with humans. We're not a big place. It's a small four-year college. And this is what we're working on. I'm not going to read all of the bullets, but just a gloss across them. We're looking at how we integrate information literacy into our curriculum. We are doing some renovations that are focused on public spaces and use of our spaces. We have a lot of technology implementations that need refining. We need to think differently about how we build our collections. We're prepping, this is the most important thing on everyone's mind right now, we're preparing for a SUNY-wide LSP upgrade that's happening in 2018. And we're really studying how we deal with our print collections. In one case, for example, we're shifting print journals down to the Empire Shared Collection, which is an off-site storage document delivery service run out of Buffalo. And we're looking at what we can digitize in our on-demand, in-demand archival collections, the things that people truly want to use. And so those horizon projects that are out there for us are really all about shifting from collections to services. And most of those services, the purchase on demand, discovery, digitization, they're all aimed at providing a service that sits on top of a collection. Our collections really do sit behind, underneath, inside everything that we do. And it's easy for me to talk about that and to plan in that way because my first job as a generalist was all about that life cycle of a collection, from birth to death, selection to weeding, and every stage in between. But all of these goals are linked to our collections, and all of them interlock. And that is why I am currently looking for a leader and for staff in tech services who are generalists because of that interlocking of collections, services, and the user. And it's why my current situation is actually such a crisis. In 2013-14, we had 4 librarians out of 10 leave our library. One relocated to be closer to her parents, one got a dream job in Colorado, one got headhunted by Penn State, and while I could offer him lots of things, I could not magically be Penn State. And one got married and followed her new husband. There's really nothing I could do about that one either. So we have been without our core tech services staff for a very long time now. And the reason it has taken so long for us to replace those folks is that I've failed 2 searches. They didn't produce the quality of candidate we were looking for. They didn't produce the skill set we were hoping for. They were not successful. And part of the problem, the first problem with that, is that institutional politics interfered with good sense, to be blunt. We were, as a campus, in the middle of a budget crisis, and so I was able to replace our information literacy librarian because it's just an easy sell. People understand teaching at institutions of higher education. But I was forced to put the archivist on hold indefinitely, and I only got permission to replace those 2 tech services folks with 1 librarian. I was told I needed to combine our metadata librarian and our web services librarian into 1 position. And I argued, and I lost. The second problem was that as a result of that directive, we smashed those 2 job descriptions together, and we didn't do an effective job of assessing what our key priorities were for this job, this new single combined job. We really wanted someone who could do it all because we felt the lack of our previous staff so keenly. And we argued to ourselves and internally that our community college colleagues do this thing all the time, this sort of thing all the time. You know, our community college colleagues are often in libraries with 1 or 2 or 3 librarians. They make this sort of thing work, so surely we can too. And so, yeah, no, we really couldn't. And I failed the search. I failed that search twice. And so I was forced to confront that perhaps the problem is us. After I failed the search the first time, I spoke at the Midwinter ALCTS Symposium about how I intended to do the second round differently. And the truth is that differently was that we thought a little bit more clearly about what kind of responsibilities should be in the job, what could be carved off of it, and how we could reorganize internally in order to make that work. But it wasn't really all that different than the first round. And as I talked about it while we were there, one of the audience members provided some feedback that people naturally want to become experts. So that means either metadata or e-resources, but not both. And that if I wanted quality applicants, I was going to have to accept that people wanted to specialize. We were asking for a lot. But as I said, you know, I really was holding on to this thought that our community college colleagues do this all the time. So why can't we? Well, the answer to that question seems to be wrapped up in what were we really expecting of our tech services positions? I mean, this really is sort of a double-edged sword, because if we want a cataloger and we need a serials librarian, but we want OERs and research data management and copyright and scholarly communication, the first 2 and the last 3 don't slide together very effectively, because you can really only be a functional expert on so many things at once. It's one thing to be a jack of all trades at an institution with 3 librarians and a much smaller workload, because, you know, for example, 1 woman can push a wheelbarrow, but 1 woman can't pull a freight train. We were just asking for too much. So here's my first solution. after I failed that second search, I really had to do some soul searching about this. I had thought I was right, and I was really wrong. So we rethought. We made 2 jobs out of that one. And the only reason that was possible was that at that point we had a new provost and a new president. And I was able to talk to those new leaders with new perspectives and new visions about what had happened. And I explained that, yes, what doesn't bend breaks, but when I bent my library to the institution's will, it broke our staffing, and I needed 2 positions. And my arguments were persuasive that time. I know that in part that was luck. That's not necessarily a transferable lesson. But at the same time, the reality of the situation was real. And I needed to communicate in a way that got the powers that were to listen to me. And so I explained it like this. In an attempt to replace skilled librarians that we have somewhat unfortunately labeled dinosaurs, we started hunting for unicorns, and neither exist. We're asking for the impossible. And this needed to be 2 jobs that respected both the skills of the future and our foundational professional skills in technical services. The workload, the skills, and the leadership needs that we had in front of us all said this had to be 2 positions. So we advertised for a technical services and metadata coordinator, which is a management level position, and an e-resources and serials librarian, which is an entry-level position. Both of them occupy that overlapping Venn diagram space that I call a generalist. Our second solution in looking for someone who was a generalist was to advertise differently. Once I had the go-ahead to hire in hand, I made a second dramatic choice for our institution. We nuked our job ads from orbit, because it's the only way to be sure. All of the long-term librarians were on board with me. Doing the same thing and expecting different results, well, we all know the cliche, and we were getting the same kinds of candidates we had been getting when we used our standard ads, and that wasn't what we wanted. The stiff academic job description model, the boilerplate, it wasn't working for us. So we came at it differently, very differently. We stopped asking for a unicorn and instead just advertised for a librarian. There were 2 required criteria: an MLS and sufficient experience in libraries to be a successful part of the team. We just got super simple. You need to be a librarian and you need some experience of some kind, of some relevance that you can explain to us as being relevant. And that was the key for us. The librarians actually advocated for me that I should write the ad and it should include as a requirement a kick-ass cover letter. I softened that language down to, I think, an outstanding cover letter, and my provost made me soften it down even further because she wanted it to be slightly less weird. But really, that was what we wanted. We wanted a kick-ass cover letter that would tell us why you were the right person for our job based on your experience as a librarian. So that explained who we needed our applicants to be. And the examples I'm including are from the Technical Services and Metadata Coordinator position, but both jobs followed the same format. So after, the next step was to explain what we hoped people would join us in doing. So I talked a bit about us with a straightforward description of what this librarian's role would be. This is a team member providing leadership and vision, supervising technical services, coordinating and supervising the work of 3 employees, and as a member of our management team. And I also listed out clear and detailed listing of the kinds of projects and initiatives that we expected people would be doing if they came to work for us. I wanted to be sure that every candidate understood up front what kind of job this was likely to be and give them enough information about who we are to write that kick-ass cover letter that could tell us why they were the right candidate to help us do these things. And continuing on that theme of honesty, I was as clear as possible about who we are here at SUNY Potsdam. You know, you read academic job ads and they are almost interchangeable from institution to institution, but our institutions are not interchangeable. So I rewrote our description of who we are. We are a historically white college struggling with diversity and inclusion as we bring students from New York City to live in the most rural, economically challenged part of New York State. We are a small staff, but we are a mix of the lifers, they call themselves that, it's not me, who have settled in Potsdam for their foreseeable future, possibly forever. And then a collection of new folks who join us, do some great work for a couple of years, and move on to the next phase of their career. And we're happy to have both. And we are people who are fully engaged in campus life. And I wanted someone who wanted that kind of job. So we tried to reframe our expectations. We tried to do a better job of communicating about who we are, but there's still no getting around it. What we need are generalists, 2 of them. And so the question is, do they exist? Am I alone in thinking that this is what we need? I started to sort of feel that way after my last presentation to ALCTS because the people who were most outspoken were telling me I was wrong, that specialists were the way of the future, that our work had gotten too complex, that there was no way to do it well without specializing. And so I began to wonder if my own experiences were outdated and my thoughts about what we needed were off base. So I needed to do some research. That was part of my soul searching I failed a search twice. I needed to do some research, and so I did. I used my best easy access resource, the SUNY Council of Library Directors and the SUNY Librarian Association. We are a group of 64 campuses, ranging from our community colleges, the smallest of which have about 1,500 students, to the University at Buffalo, which has 30,000 students. There are 4 university centers, 10 doctoral institutions, 13 comprehensive colleges, including me, 8 technical schools, and 30 community colleges. So this is a great pool of people to ask for perspectives because we have so many variations on libraries in our system. And I got all the feedback I could have hoped for and more. We almost universally, the folks who responded agreed, we need generalists. We need people who can see the tech services forest ecosystem and its trees. Tech services generalists serve a unique purpose as they can participate anywhere in the workflow and see the bigger picture. And those are statements that really resonated for me because our best and most successful tech services librarians have been able to understand the complexity of our interconnected systems and their role in it. And the same thing is true of interlibrary loan, for example. If you don't understand how your union catalog was created, it's going to be hard to figure out how to borrow and lend most effectively, right? But I've also worked with too many specialists who were truly excellent at ILL or web design or authorities, but they couldn't see their context. And without that context, we don't make sound decisions. And on small, agile teams, much like mine, all of our professionals need to be able to participate in decision-making. My colleagues didn't just talk about the big picture and why we like people who can see it. They also talked about the functional details of this. Tech services work is far too interconnected within today's LSPs to function effectively when specialists are only focusing on a tiny subset of user needs. And I liked this one. Tech services is going to turn into all things back end. And for smaller campuses like ours, this will be tasked to one person. Again, this is part of the perspective that I had brought to my own searches, that our community college campuses do this. Why can't we? But the concerns continue. A big issue is development of leaders who can make planning and policy decisions. Keeping up with rapid and continual changes in standards and technology is difficult and time-consuming, creating the problem of production versus professional development. This is absolutely a true statement. A resource sharing librarian reported, we don't have any tech services librarians. Our director doesn't see the value in having such a position. They'd prefer to outsource things like cataloging. And then we had the two that made me really sad at the same time that they made me chuckle. Not optimistic, I'm retiring soon and can't wait to retire from the head of cataloging and metadata and the head of bibliographic services at 2 of our campuses. There's obviously some concern. Who will do the work that underpins all of our services if we're not finding or training these people who can work with planning and policy decisions? Who will be our leaders if our library directors don't acknowledge the value of having tech services positions at all? Who will take the next steps on behalf of our institutions if we don't have generalists moving up through the ranks? These are really big questions. They're important questions about the future of our institutions and our success in delivering services to our users. Because again, all of our services are built on top of our collections. And if our collections aren't well managed, our services cannot be effective. Oops. Apologize. And in a survey directly to the some of my library director colleagues who I knew had hired recently, our hiring trends validate those concerns from our colleagues. None of the respondents to my survey to directors were happy with the recent quality of the pool in their searches for tech services librarians. One reported that the pools were very small and they don't particularly live in a library poor area with a library school just 45 minutes away. Another said, we're experiencing this same situation with our vacant systems position. We've searched it multiple times. And another said, we need more tech services librarians, generalists, that they recently filled a position and all the top candidates, for that matter, all the candidates that met the requirements were from out of state, and that person had never experienced that before for any other library position. Our searches aren't going particularly well. And these were directors at the comprehensive colleges. Colleges like mine that are not university centers, but are not community colleges. We sit somewhere in the middle. It's a 4-year institution. And what we need is those people who can be the jack of all trades. So with my experience and that feedback from my colleagues, I have to sit back and think, where do we go from here? We all know that these problems exist. We know that they're sticky, intractable problems. And I know that most of what I just said is unlikely to be news to most of you. And I hope that what I've added is some nuance or new evidence, but still, we all know we have some challenges here. So what comes next? So again, I'm going to lean on some of the insights from my colleagues. We need to nurture our current people. How can generalists afford access affordable training to become more specialized, especially given the strong demand for reference and instruction work and a million other hats that one must wear at a community college? That's a good question, and it's one that our professional organizations have been working on essentially forever. And what I'm wondering, given all that we've talked about so far, if there's an unfilled room for online professional development about the forest, not the trees. That perhaps it's not that we need to become more specialized, it's that we need to be better able to integrate all of the things we already know. And then there's the leadership part of nurturing our talents. There's the quote about how our library doesn't have any tech services people because our director doesn't value it. And then there's this one. Administrators pull catalogers away to do other tasks when there's not even sufficient time to keep up with technical services issues, work, and professional development. It makes technical services staff feel that their work is not considered important in its own right. And that one hit me where I live. Because perhaps, yes, there is less volume of tangible work in tech services than in decades past. And perhaps tech services work is not as easy to sell as information literacy, student learning, public outreach, programming, early literacy. And perhaps it's not as time sensitive as delivering the above services. and perhaps due to its specialized skill sets, it won't ever be farmed out to other colleagues the way that research services often are. But there are ways that we can talk about those true things that don't devalue that work. So what are those ways? Well, I think that ALA has it right. I actually very much like the Libraries Transform campaign. I use it all the time for a variety of purposes. I didn't expect to use it here, but I realized it fit. Libraries inspire understanding and community healing. Libraries do inspire community. The thing is, I think we could use a little of that healing internally, not just externally. We need to pay attention to how we talk about our work, how we talk about our colleagues, and how we talk about their contributions to our libraries. What do our org charts communicate about the value of technical services? What are people's titles? Who do they report to? How many resources have been assigned to an area? How is leadership being developed in our technical services staff? How are those people being supported and encouraged to contribute to broader initiatives? How is tech services scholarship and professional development supported, promoted, handled, publicized? All of these are ways that we express our values. The way that we assign resources, the way that we value people internally, and how we then assign their perceived rank and power in an institution comes through these kinds of tools. Titles, charts, leadership skills, who gets pushed forward, who gets held back, whose accomplishments are celebrated, whose are not. Those are the things that lead to people feeling certain ways about their own value to an institution. And so are we saying what we mean in our internal structures? We also need to do more work to redefine technical services work for the future. It's a good quote from a colleague. "I'm worried that we're building systems and services that we will no longer be able to maintain if we don't nurture those who can maintain them." I've had this conversation before. We often weave in and out of debate about how valuable it is when we find a programmer, a systems engineer, a cataloger, or other specialist who understands how the rubber meets the road, how their data meets the user. It's one of our perennial complaints about our vendors, that they don't know and they don't get how their products work in a library. And we're afraid that we're replicating that problem in our libraries. Because we hear a lot of this. This came as feedback, again, to my presentation at Midwinter. A librarian who said, "I don't want to work the reference desk, and it's not fair for you to say that's unreasonable. I'm a cataloger by choice, and I'm good at it." This came in response to my statement that all of our librarians do some sort of public research assistance. Information literacy, working at the help desk, doing consultations, doing online reference, something. Because we have to stay grounded in what our users need and how they behave with our systems. And even tech services librarians need that perspective. Especially tech services needs that perspective. But we've defined technical services as not public services. If you think about the Boolean definitions of library work, technical services seems to be, by definition, not public services. But I'm not sure that that is serving us to the best for our profession. So what can we do about that? I go back to ALA. We need to transform how people see themselves. People need to see themselves in the work in front of them. And so I recommend that we need to better articulate the core value of tech services work to the easier out front parts of librarianship. It's not about providing research services. It's about the ways in which we've built systems that allow us to provide research services. And we need to push our tech services folks out to the front of the crowd, the front of the library, out of their comfort zones, even when they don't want to go. But in doing that, we have to make sure that that uncomfortable zone for them has a variety of seats available. And what I mean by that is that our tech services folks need to see and experience where their data meets the user, because that's the place where discovery and inspiration happen. And you can do better work when you have those experiences of saying, oh crap, I didn't think anyone would try to do that. But you can't just shove somebody into a role that they're not suited for. And so you need to make sure that there are a variety of ways in which that interaction can happen. Maybe it's usability testing. Maybe it's online reference, not face-to-face research assistance. Maybe it's a one-on-one consultation for which the librarian has time to plan and prepare because they're not comfortable being put on the spot. Maybe it's research help desk work because that's a great change from what they normally do all day. But I have a baseline philosophical belief that our tech services folks need to have an opportunity. They need to be able to see how our users interact with the work that they do. But part of that has to be making sure that our mid-career librarians go back to nurture our current talent. If you're going to switch things up a bit and say, you know what, I need you to do these things that are not necessarily where you have always been professionally. If that's going to happen, then you need to make sure that professional development has been provided for those people, because you can't ask people to be, work, think, and live differently without providing them the tools to do so. And I think that we often neglect our mid-career people because they are the most self-sufficient among us. But that doesn't mean they don't need our help. And the future's out there. It's a thing. It's always looming over the horizon, staring at us. So library director said we shouldn't think of tech services as just for books and media. Frankly, in our shop, metadata description for images and institutional repository content could be a full-time job. I believe we all know this. This is not a surprise. Another librarian said, MLS students don't understand the value of a broad technical services position anymore. They see the pieces, cataloging, scholarly communications, research data, serials, but not the big picture, and we need the big picture. And this feels accurate to me. This is essentially what I've been saying all along. But this statement is also very defensive. It's really easy to blame our library schools for not doing a good enough job. It's also really lazy. They're trying. There's a lot to teach, and they're doing their best. It's not easy to hit all the marks that we wish they could hit for a new professional. And the truth of the matter is we could be doing a better job of helping. Because access to things equals opportunity to things. And we are the ones who control the access to our libraries. So I ask, how do our ads read? Are our job ads encouraging and engaging the kind of new professionals that we want to have look at us? Are we bringing in library interns, volunteers, or mentoring student professionals in tech services to help us build the pipeline of professionals? This is a conversation that we have about diversity all the time, that you can't hire candidates with racial diversity in our field if we don't build a pipeline of people coming into our field who have that diversity. Well, the same thing is true about the diversity of responsibilities and positions in libraries. They don't exist if we don't nurture them. And how is tech services work included in your publicity strategies? What are you showcasing? Are you showcasing the service? And if you're showcasing a service, are you linking it to the incredible work that has been done underneath it to allow it to happen? If you talk about interlibrary loan, are you also providing a little bit of perspective about the kind of system that sits behind it that allows that interlibrary loan to happen? I know it's geeky and we think that nobody cares, but nobody will ever care if we never tell anybody. And so the final question is, are we articulating this value of tech services work to the rest of the services that libraries offer well enough to engage other people in it? Are we making it look and sound like something people want to do? So, my recent reality has taught me to be a little afraid. And I surveyed my SUNY colleagues, and it became clear that they also are pretty nervous. but I would argue that we're complicit in some of that current dilemma, and we don't have to be. We can change things. We're not helpless. In fact, I think we have everything we need to grow our own professionals. I grew up in Illinois, in the farm country on the Wisconsin border, so growing and cultivating metaphors work for me. I think that we can reflect on our own expectations about our libraries and about library professionals. We can communicate more clearly about what we need, what we want, and what we do. We can nurture the people that we have and make sure that they are being provided the resources they need to be our next leaders. And we can take responsibility for our own professional pipeline. We can do all of those things if we choose to confront the challenge head-on. And I believe we can do this. I think we just need to think about fields and forests, that whole ecosystem that my colleagues referred to, rather than just that one tree we've been staring at. I've been staring at my blank, empty technical services positions, but there's so much more to the picture than I have a vacancy. And so if I step back and look at the forest, if we all do that, I think we can see that we have what we need to do this. So I'm closing with a picture of my kid. That's Gwyneth. She's 3, and I've included her for a reason. Because in this picture, I mean, A, she's a cute kid, and what parent doesn't love their cute kid? But also because she's wearing a dress that has molecules, HTML, and other science iconography on it. And sure, it's just a dress. It's a small choice. She doesn't really know what it means yet or understand my perspectives about feminism and possibility and STEM fields and her potential. It's a small thing. But we all have a chance to help build what comes next in our world and our profession through small choices and big ones. So I encourage us all to think about what we can do, small and large. So thank you for listening, and I would be happy to answer any questions that you can type into the questions box.
Great. Thank you, Jenica, for sharing your experiences and your thought-provoking ideas about how we can think about the positions we're hiring. Again, if you have questions for Jenica, please enter them in the questions box. We already have a few questions. One comment and question from an attendee is that much of this applies equally to upper-level library assistants or non-librarian positions. Have you had that experience as well?
Absolutely. The truth of the matter is that the reason we've been able to go for 3 years with no tech services coordinator or e-resources librarian is that I have an amazing staff of library assistants who have worked with us for 38 and 17 years respectively, who are carrying the work of the department because they understand so much of what they do. They are the ones who understand how all those pieces fit together through decades of experience. And the challenge is that because they are not librarians at the professional level, they are not as well equipped to explore sort of the edge issues, the horizon issues, the future building stuff, the future proofing. Not because they're not capable of it, but because they're very comfortable with what they do. And they see that as being a librarian's job. And I can't disagree with that argument. They would, in SUNY terms, in state of New York terms, they'd be working out of title if I moved them to doing that kind of planning and strategic visioning. It's not what they want to do. But we have made sure that they have the resources to continue building their amazing expertise because they are truly the core of what keeps us moving.
Great, thank you. We have another question. How do current solo tech services librarians cultivate new leaders? The attendee says, I know of a librarian who inherited her job from a 35-year lifer when he died. She did not benefit from mentorship and had to learn from baptism by fire. Now she's close to retirement and worries about how to find someone to fill the position and mentor the person.
It's a really sticky issue. I was speaking with someone recently who talked about documentation manuals, and I just sort of chuckled because we have a cataloging policy. I'm not sure when we last touched it, and we have staff who have been in their jobs, as I said, for literally decades, who do what they do, and they know what they do, and they know how to do it. And the best answer that I have is that people who are in those positions with a wealth of institutional knowledge can do us all a favor by document. You know, it's like practice, location, document. It's not the same as being able to sit with someone and learn from them for 6 months, but I'm not sure that anything ever can be. I am also, however, incredibly grateful to be part of a system like SUNY, because when I started here, I discovered that I had this incredible community of colleagues who I could lean on, so that when the SUNY state grant came through and everyone in my library referred to it as the New York State Grant for Collection Development, and I couldn't find any documentation on the state grant, and then I learned that that's because it's the Cooperative Collection Development Aid Program, but nobody calls it that because they call it the state grant. You know, it was my colleagues at Brockport and Oswego that I leaned on to learn that. And so my best advice for any new professional or anyone who's moving into a new place is find the community that can help you decode your work. There's always someone who can help.
Excellent, thank you. Another attendee asks, why is it I never hear about front of the house workers being asked to work in the back of the house?
I think it's a skill set problem, truthfully. The technical services, you know, I mean, I'm talking about generalists, but I don't think that there are very many tech services librarians who want the circ staff to come catalog, right? We have an incredible collection of very important standards and processes that require accuracy. And so it's not something we're comfortable farming out. And I don't know if that's necessary or not. You know, it's the way it's always been, but who's to say that the rest of our public services staff couldn't be appropriately trained to do the work in the back room? We just don't. And maybe that's another one of the questions that we need to try to dump on its head.
Great. Another question is, what job titles did you end up advertising the new generalist positions as?
We advertised for a technical services and metadata coordinator, and that is the team leader. We chose tech services and metadata as the two key phrases because we wanted to communicate that it is all of the traditional print library tech services work of acquisitions through weeding, but also the metadata work affiliated with ebooks, online resources, etc. And we also advertised for an electronic resources and serials librarian for the same reason. We need someone to manage our access point for all of our databases and serials, and that is an e-resources librarian, but we also have some print collections that need handling, so we put the serials part in to indicate that those are side-by-side responsibilities.
Great. So what mentoring do you plan to provide for your potential new hires to help gain some of the more specialized skills driven by the big projects you have on your horizon? If you know since you're the qualifications are rather minimal,
very
so
vague.
so especially since that new person will be responsible for mentoring another person. How do you have it seems like some resources will be necessary to provide some of this training and mentoring for your new hires.
Absolutely. So there are a couple of things. The truth is that by putting in those very low boundary requirements for the positions, we actually got some incredibly qualified applicants. A question I have been batting around in my head since we posted these jobs is how many librarians don't apply for things because they don't think they're qualified. If I'd put in more requirements, which of those people would have chosen not to apply for my job? So I think we have an interesting self-confidence problem there. So anyway, that aside, I am lucky to have on staff several long-term librarians who are experts in their field. So our systems librarian, Marianne Hebert, knows as much as there is to know about SUNY's implementation of ALIF. She is one of our system-wide experts on our current setup. So she will be a part of the team for the migration, and I expect that our new tech services coordinator will have a lot to learn from her. That said, I'm also have every intention of leaning on as many SUNY groups as possible to help our new folks find those mentoring relationships that they need so that they can take, benefit from what I benefited from in this system. And I have set aside professional development money for our new folks because new people need the opportunity to gain the skills they discover that they have a gap for. Right? You don't know where your own skills gaps are until you hit a job and you're like, oh, wow, I have no idea how to tackle that one. What do I do? And so I always budget, when we hire new librarians, I budget specifically set aside what is essentially a startup package for them so that they can help me figure out where their gaps are and the best way to fill them.
That's great, and I really like what you had to say about the confidence issue too. I think that's a really great point. We have another question, which if you're able to answer, where are you at with the 2 searches?
We are at the interview stage.
Great. Okay.
I hope to know more in a month.
Great. So another question is, how do you keep these positions from morphing into unicorn positions after you've hired them, and just in terms of managing the workload? And when it is a generalist position, then what become the constraints so that people still have a manageable job?
Yes, that is. As library director, that is absolutely 100% my responsibility. I have to make sure that we do not burn out our people. It was a lesson we learned with an entry-level librarian about 6 years ago who was so eager to take on a million new projects because they were all exciting and fun and she could do a good job, and then she just completely burnt herself out into this hollow husk of herself because she had taken on far more than any one person could do. And I let her do it because I thought she could do it, and I think sometimes people need to learn from failure, but I let her go too far. And so I try not to make that mistake again. And so every new project is a discussion between me and the employee about what's their current workload look like. Do they really think this is a realistic thing for them to take on? Do they want to do it because there's passion behind it, or because they think somebody should do it, or what's their logic for moving beyond the core set of responsibilities? And sometimes the answer is that we have a moment where we can jump on something, and so we need to do it, and I think I'm the right person to do it, and we'll let go of something else for a little while. We're going to be faced with several major unmovable projects like the migration, which is going to happen. There's also right now a SUNY grant to deal with open educational resources, and there's state money to make that happen, and so it's a time when we need to strike when the iron is hot. And so there are some things that we may have to do that won't be permanent. They'll be startup projects. And so then I think that there's also a conversation to be had about committing to startup, but not necessarily committing to maintenance. And so one of the things that I do is every summer we have a strategic planning retreat, either with the librarians or the library staff as a total, and we work out what our project plans and priorities are. And we're going to have to be very, very conscious of that with these big projects that we don't have any choice about. So we're going to have to be very thoughtful about the things we do have choices about.
Thank you. Okay, we have time for 1 or 2 more questions. So another question that's come in is, thank you for sharing your experience in finding the right candidate for technical services. My question is, how do you handle an applicant who has a tremendous background in cataloging from a foreign country but doesn't have a MLS or an ALA accredited MLS?
I am constrained by the SUNY requirements for our librarian positions, which require accreditation of degrees. So all of our ads are posted that it's an MLS from an ALA accredited institution or one of the foreign agencies that ALA recognizes as being equivalent to their own accreditation.
Great. Another question is, what role will documentation play in the training of the new hires versus mentoring relationships?
Our documentation kind of sucks, so it's going to have to be mentoring. I mean, I could say something else, but that's the truth.
So just in terms of a final question, to what extent is, what you're looking for about an attitude or a point of view, I mean, in terms of being open-minded about learning new things and taking on new skills, and how do you look for that or evaluate that in your hiring process?
So I'm completely of two minds about that question, because one of the things that I instinctively want to say is that if I can hire a person who wants to be a part of our team, then we can teach them anything, right? We can facilitate learning of anything as long as this person wants to be here doing the things we do. But at the same time, I'm also very reluctant to say we hire for fit, because that is often code for we hire people who are like us, and I'm not comfortable with that. So it is a very delicate balancing act. We need legitimate experience and skills that will allow the person our people to start, with their feet on the ground and ready to run. But I also really do value colleagues who are interested in learning, who are interested in the future, who want to see where multiple paths might take us, who aren't afraid of failure, who are willing to try weird stuff, and who are willing to tell me when I'm wrong. So there is a lot of personality involved, but it can't be just about personality, because then we end up hiring a whole lot of middle-class white people.
Okay, well, thank you, Jenica. Thanks so much. To our audience, we're glad that you could be with us today. You'll soon receive an email with the recordings and the slides and a short evaluation form. Please take a few minutes to complete the evaluation. We value your comments, and they'll help the ALCTS Continuing Education Committee plan future events. The email will also include a certificate of attendance and information on how to get a digital badge. Thanks to Mary Reeder and Wanda Jazieri from the ALCTS Continuing Education Committee and Megan Doherty from the ALCTS office for technical support. The support they provide makes it possible for us to present these webinars smoothly. ALCTS has several upcoming events. I invite you to please join us for ALCTS Exchange, which is our first fully online virtual forum, which will be held over 4 days, May 9th and 11th, and May 16th and 18th. And our final webinars for this spring will be the ALCTS Virtual Pre-Conference on June 6th and 7th, which is on the topic of diverse, inclusive, and equitable metadata. And then our webinar series will resume in the fall. Oops. We also offer web courses, which are 4 to 6 weeks long, and e-forums, which are 2-day email discussions. You'll find more information on the ALCTS website. We hope you will participate in other ALCTS continuing education offerings again in the future. This concludes our session. Thank you for joining us.